Maybe not on the minutes themselves, but some follow-up questions, which I can probably do in the action item.
Okay, should we do that then?
Yeah.
Okay, so adoption of minutes.
I move the adoption.
Thank
Joyce?
you, Joyce.
Yeah.
Seconder?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Thank you. And it's adopted. Any public comments under point 3?
No.
None. Okay. Just moving through stuff. Okay, action items. There was a number of items that were identified flowing from the last meeting from March 30th. A list of requested actions were provided to everybody. And so maybe we can just quickly go through those items, and we'll Liam's on the first 3 of them. So if you could please provide your comments as regard to the actions that were requested. So Liam, if you would.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to pull that up here.
Okay. It's under.
So I got confirmation from Patrick that there will be no impact to the homes as the new system comes online. And so there was some questions from folks about whether, as we shift from the existing system to the new system, will there be a flush of debris that might impact people's appliances and other home assets? And then there should be no impact, nothing noticeable other than cleaner water. And so I got that confirmation. And I also, while we're on that topic, can confirm that the plant should be operational by the end of next week.
Wow, good.
Thank you for that.
Okay. The second point is, I think people were asking whether they need to continue with their current water purification systems.
And that's a preference thing.
Yep.
And so the system will do a great job of reducing the amount, if not eliminating any presence of organic materials, but it may not eliminate all coloration. It's a difficult thing to do, but it will, because of the high level of filtration, it will reduce the amount of chlorination required as well. So there'll be an improvement in the quality of water, both from a what's called a aesthetic quality, as well as a actual potable quality. So people may choose to continue to use the system to further reduce chlorine in their consumption. But probably the cheapest, most effective way is to simply switch over to like a Brita type system. Not that I'm promoting Brita, but but others may want to continue to have that what they call a point of entry system, where upon entering the home, all of the faucets would be going through some type of additional filtration.
Yeah, I think one of the questions, just to add to that particular point, was whether there's, if it's appropriate that the municipality craft a communication piece about, the use of purification systems. And it might be something in one of the weekly updates in the paper, something to suggest that, it's up to the owner to decide.
Yeah, we've reached out to our communications manager about that, and we're going to craft something for next week to go out. Well, one, to acknowledge that, hey, we've got the system is online, you're getting new water, and two, that don't be worried about the first flush issue, and also that you may you may want to consider changes to any in-home system that you have, but that's a personal choice.
Thank you.
Brad?
And the final one was just a review.
Brad?
Sorry.
On that bit about advising people to disconnect their personal systems, that's a very touchy area, because if somebody disconnects it and then something happens and they get sick, then they're going to come back to us and say, you said I could disconnect it. So I think you just have to say very clearly, it's entirely your personal choice whether you disconnect your existing filtration systems or not. Don't make any.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's what I was implying, is that we're not going to tell people to disconnect. It's a personal choice if they want.
Well, I
Yeah.
wouldn't even encourage them in any way in the narrative.
No, but it's more so to answer the question that people are going to have.
Because you could get 100 questions coming your way.
Yeah.
Or more.
Fred, if I may, because I think I probably had the technical answer to that. The word from the experts is you leave your current system as is. When it next comes to changing filters, it will be entirely up to you whether you decide to keep the various stages you have at the moment. But then you will decide that depending upon the state of your filters as you change them. So I think it's basically business as usual, and then in time you'll make your own decision. But I completely agree. The worst thing we can do right now is say the water is marvelous, strip your filters off, throw them away, you won't need them anymore, because that may, especially as far as chlorine content and the rest initially, that may not be the case. So I actually went to the trouble of getting the word from our people on just where we stand on this. So for what it's worth.
Right.
Good, thank you.
Just if I can just add to that, you know, some of the systems like Belterra, for example, spends $10,000 a year on their system. And so they're really keen to find out like what options are available to them. But Michael Kale is exactly right. You know, the advice is to wait till the next cycle and make a choice then.
Good, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, moving on. Liam, you were going to just provide sorry? Okay. You were going to provide just a comment in regards to the financial commitments for the multipath, and that if that it doesn't contravene the acquisition limits we established for the budget for new assets.
Oh, right. I have to circle back to confirm that exactly. So
okay,
I can actually confirm that it doesn't. The funding for the new portion was well below those limits.
The funding that for the 2021 budget?
In the 2021 budget for the municipal portion of the funding.
Only the municipal, that was a question I had.
Yes. Yeah, the municipal portion of funding, and that's what the FAC recommendation was that we not put more than $200,000 a year, 200 or 275, I have to double check, for investment in new assets. So it
was 275
of that during the budget. We were very careful of that during the budget process, and I just went and checked again, just as a double check to see what we funded from reserves, municipal reserves, and it was well below that amount.
I thought it was 302,000 in my spreadsheet that I did from Patrick's report.
Some of that was carried forward from the previous year, so I'm not taking that into consideration. So I'm talking about new funding that came from the Transportation Initiatives Reserve, and that's what the FAC recommendation was with respect to.
Okay, thank you.
And then I note that in the action item list, it says a limit of $275. So should we?
Oh, I think it should be a little higher than that.
Yeah.
Yeah, forgot that.
Some of the people I was talking to today.
Put a lowercase k after that. How's that?
Yeah. Okay.
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions on that? No. Okay. And Steph, you were going to find some council resolution regarding interim construction financing.
Yeah, I found it and I linked it to the minutes from the March 30th meeting.
Thank you. And the terms of reference, which is the balance of the information requested under action, is identified under the current agenda. So I have nothing further as it relates to requested actions. Any other comments or questions or points to be raised?
I just want to say that I really appreciate the link to the previous discussions or to enlighten us. That helps a lot. Thank you.
Good, thank you.
So now it's a habit, right?
We really like it. Yes, absolutely. Anyway, so that's the action items, which we will move on now to point 5, which is updates. And Liam, I believe that you're going to provide under 5.1 an update on capital projects.
Right, okay. Thank you, Chair. So I'll start with the fire hall. You may have noticed that there's been a fair bit of activity in site development, and there's received some of the construction materials on site last week. And so they're moving along quite well. And all things are moving ahead according to schedule. Maybe I'll go through all of them and we can come back to questions.
Sure.
The multi-use path, phase 1 is all of the road base works have been done, and they're gearing up for prepping for asphalt. However, we've asked them to slow down on the asphalt for that portion of the project because we did secure additional funding for the section from Carter Road to Artisan Square Road. And so it's a small section, but an important section. And so the vendor Tri-X has been secured to continue their work to prep that next section. And so then ideally we will be able to do all the asphalt at one time. We're waiting to hear confirmation of funding approval, fingers crossed, on the final section or what would actually be the initial section from the ferry, effectively from
Cardina to Seniors Road.
Thank you, Cardina. Yes, that's the word I forgot. Cardina to actually to go up and beyond Seniors to come all the way up the hill to the school. And again, what we're hopeful for is that we're told by the Minister of Municipal Affairs that there would be announcements this month on those projects. And if we get an approval announcement, then we can move to secure Tri-X for that portion of work as well. And so that would be a great addition. The piece with that final piece of the multi-use path of Cardina to Seniors, though, because of funding, would have to be tendered publicly, which I don't think would be any problem. It's just be another portion of the project that we have to do. And the community center is nearing tendering, so we're getting close to finalizing all the tender documents, and we'll be moving to the steering committee in the coming weeks, and then following that to council to seek approval to go to public tender on that project. And we're hopeful to secure bids in the summertime. So it'll be out to tender for at least 6 weeks, do the review and assessment, hoping to secure a vendor at the end of the summer, early fall, and finalize a contract for construction start this fall. And then the composting project, we're still waiting for a funding announcement on that project. We think it's a really good fit for that program, but we don't have any, we were told this spring we would hear of funding decisions, but we don't have any definitive timelines on that.
Okay.
Any questions on any of those projects?
No. Okay, hearing none. Thank you very much, Liam. I appreciate it. We're now moving on to point 6, new business. 6.1, development cost charges bylaw. Raj, you were going to provide us some information on that. You've provided a copy of a report with the agendas, and also an attachment as identified there. So Raj, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Fred. So yes, as you mentioned, I wrote a brief report on development cost charges. Maybe I'll just go over the highlights of the report and then open it up for discussion. So development cost charges, also known as DCCs, are monies that are collected from land developers by a municipality, and they can only be used to fund growth-related infrastructure. So as mentioned in the report, they can be used for sewer, water, drainage, parks, and transportation infrastructure. And DCCs must be established by bylaw, and that bylaw needs to receive approval from the inspected municipalities. The charges can be collected from developers either at the time of subdivision or at the issuance of a building permit. And once DCCs have been levied and collected, they must be deposited into separate funds and may only be used for capital costs related to the purposes specified in the DCC bylaw. BIM currently only has one DCC bylaw, which is for the acquisition of parkland. That bylaw was established by the Greater Vancouver Regional District and inherited by BIM upon incorporation. I believe the bylaw, there is a copy of the bylaw attached to the report I prepared. And I believe it was prepared, the bylaw is dated to 1998. As you're all aware, there are infrastructure capacity challenges in the Snug Cove sewer. And the municipality is contemplating development cost charges or development cost charges bylaw for the Snug Cove sewer system. Preliminary calculations anticipate the development cost charge to be about $26,000 per single family connection for new development. And there will be a report forthcoming from staff on further information on DCCs and a proposed bylaw. And I will open the discussion up, turn it back to the chair for questions.
Okay, thank you.
Discussion.
Any comments or questions that relates to Raj's report?
Fred?
Allison?
So rolling down in the second to the last paragraph on the first page of the report, it says they must go into DCC reserve funds. Now, our parks DCC money is sitting in deferred revenues. So have we been reporting this incorrectly? Should we have a statutory reserve fund to accept the DCCs?
DCCs are always reported as a liability in your statements, even though that they are separately tracked in separate accounts. So you don't recognize DCCs until you take or until they're used. So they're
Okay, so they're not technically, even though the charter says they're supposed to go into a reserve fund, it's a PSAB to put them into deferred revenue.
That's correct.
So the report's a little misleading.
My apologies on that, but yeah.
Okay. And then the other question is the second sentence in that paragraph may only be used for capital costs relating to an approved DCC bylaw. So if the expenditure happens before the DCCs are collected and you had to borrow $2 million, or you used internal funds, that's probably two separate questions. If you had to borrow $2 million to do the improvement, and then the DCCs dribble in over the next 20 years, can you use that DCC money to pay the interest and the capital on the loan?
So that's an issue that staff is looking into. I don't have the answer for you right now. I believe that was raised by council at a previous meeting or in the committee of the whole discussion as well. So
Okay.
we're looking into that.
So the second part of that question is if you borrow internally and you use your surplus to pay for that, or you borrow from a reserve fund, that's not the Snug Cove Sewer Reserve Fund, can you use those DCC monies that's collected subsequent to the construction of the sewer to pay back your own internal borrowing?
Again, I don't have the answer to that, Alison. Maybe Liam had his hand up. He may have something more information than I do.
So yeah, Raj is right. We've got a question into the ministry to confirm, but my understanding is that DCCs are collected in advance of their use and that they can't be used retroactively, but that you can then apply latecomer fees for those. So it's a combination of different tools that we want to use for financing infrastructure expansion for new development.
So if we expanded the whole thing, so it would accommodate needed new development, and we continue to collect DCCs and there's no more expansion needed, then what do we do with the money?
Well, it's not, I can't say with certainty, but it's not likely that we will expand the whole thing for the next 40 years. So the expansion would be done in a phased approach. So we would be able to collect DCCs for future expansion needs.
There's not that much area left in the Snug Cove sewer.
When we look at the
Um,
population expansion requirements, we have factored out a 10, 20, and 40-year expansion requirements. So there's what we call the immediate, midterm, and long-term growth needs. And so if we don't have any DCCs in place, then we can't collect any upfront charges for future expansion, and it would all have to be latecomer fees.
Joyce?
it just is related to people coming on where their septic systems may be getting to end of life. I'm really thinking about the Deep Cove area. We had a discussion a while ago when we were talking about the sewage treatment plant that had not been considered as being a potential pressure. And I was wondering if in this discussion where we're looking at what the potential charges would be, does that apply equally to that kind of a pressure, or are we still not looking at that pressure at this point?
That's in our 40-year pressure window, and maybe that'll accelerate because, you know, anecdotally, I don't have any evidence to back any of this up, but my sense is that the density in that neighborhood is pretty high to continue to maintain septic fields. If they all start failing, they don't really have the land available to put in new systems. And so then that might be accelerated. But we wouldn't be able to charge them and wouldn't want to charge them DCCs for that because it's not an appropriate charge, but there's other mechanisms to then charge them for capacity requirements at the plant and the pipe for connection.
Okay. Any other questions? I just have one question. I'd sort of asked Raj a couple of things. I was kind of curious about how this all works. And he referenced me to the best practices under the local government's, or it's not local government, but the BC government's best practice guide, which I thought was kind of interesting. I learned a lot, Raj, but it kind of is interesting to me in terms of definition of improvements related to development. And I think it appears to me that, at least from what I'm looking at some other municipal governments, that they're a little more, I don't want to say liberal in their definition of development as it relates to the projects at hand, in terms of a broader reference to rather than specific improvements to the project or area that's being developed, which impacts new subdivisions, and or also the use of a DCC applying to either the entire municipality or particularly large areas around things such as roads, water, drainage, and the parkland that's identified. And I guess the question is it in our interest as a municipality to have a close and tight definition, or to consider what seems to be fairly common practice in other areas, and to see if, because I mean, a lot of it, when you talk about to land developers, it also talks about whether you do things up front, and there's all sorts of front ender stuff, and I guess things like that, which I kind of got a sense of. But I also noticed that most communities seem to establish that DCCs are payable upon building permit, which is the choice, because you have to decide which way to go. And there's also provisions for interest and a number of other things over time as matters are being put in place. It just seems to me that it may be something that should be explored. And I have no expertise in this whatsoever. But it's fascinating to me to see how it plays out. But I was looking at North Vancouver City, and I also looked at Mission in terms of their position. And I just think that these are things that will need at least to be considered. And I don't think what we should do are minimums in situations. We should look at it from a practical point of view as what future costs are going to be and what the impacts are on our communities and our taxpayers. So just a thought.
One's got his hand up, Fred.
Okay, please.
In terms of DCCs, of course, in my background, I've certainly dealt with DCCs in a lot of municipalities, and I've seen it, like Surrey, for instance, really raised them at a certain point, and then development slowed down, and then they lowered them and they raised them. But I think of course, the big issue on Bowen is the division, we hope, of more affordable housing, especially for people that work on Bowen. And this may have an impact on the financial, the economics. But I guess the question is, say, in the Snug Cove area, are some properties which are going to be developed, have they already been apportioned their share of this system? I.e., say the lot beside the pub, which has been on the table for quite a while. And then I think there's another one further up the hill where, there's thought of maybe 4 affordable units could be built. Would those be charged this, or is this for things that are not envisioned in the current OCP?
This would be applicable to any subdivision within the service area. And so there is not capacity that has been reserved for those lots. So I believe the one that you're referencing, I don't know all of the lots very well, but I believe the one you're referencing adjacent to the pub, or if there's a redevelopment of another property, that they would be charged the DCC.
Well, that's something for the municipality just to give thought to. Because of course, one of our goals is we're working hard to try and get more affordable housing.
Right.
And how much will it be if it's 26,000 for a single family house? How much will it be for a 2-bedroom affordable apartment? It could be 13 or 14,000. I don't know. There's 10,000 per person, so that actually could be more than 26,000 if you envision 3 people in a 2-bedroom apartment, which is quite punitive.
So the challenge is that you can't get around the capital cost. Somebody has to pay. And the premise is that development pays for development, growth pays for growth. That's the mantra. And so if we don't choose to use DCCs or latecomer fees or charge the appropriate amount for capacity per capita, then somebody's going to have to pay that. And if it's not coming from the service area, then it's coming from general taxation. And so the municipality can choose to spread the cost across the broader tax base, which would make it more cost effective. But is that equitable to have people that aren't in the service area paying for a service? I would argue that it's not. But there's times where that is equitable, and there's need for that. For example, there's a lot of services in the Cove that the entire island benefits from. So you could make the case that some of the broader tax base should be contributing to the sewer because they get the benefit from those services. But it's a really good point, John. Housing affordability is a critical issue that we're acutely aware of, and but so is the capital cost for construction that has to be paid for in some way or another.
And just as an aside, some of the programs, strange as it sounds, from senior levels of government, for instance, the CMHC program that promotes rental housing, if you could get concessions financially from the municipality, you actually get extra points in consideration of your application. So crazy as it sounds, maybe you keep in your mind that maybe at some point, yes, we might be levying 31,000 for a 2-bedroom apartment, but we may actually have a 50% rebate if they sign a housing agreement that it's to be for affordable housing. So like all this stuff, I think you need to think of up front, because all the other municipalities are going through it, a lot of them are just doing everything they can to try and encourage non-market housing. Because there's just, I mean, we all know about the housing shortage. And I think I missed the conversation at the beginning of the meeting about housing for a fellow, but I would just really, suggest the municipality gives this a lot of deep thought as to, how we can encourage people to build rental. Even market rental is considered more affordable than market purchase. And more flexible for younger people that are coming and going, working on the island for a while and then not. So it is an important pool to have. So,
Right, and I really appreciate that thought, and we'll definitely explore it. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, if the price tag is $8.8 million for a treatment plant upgrade, we've got to find the capital.
Yeah, this is Fred here. I mean, I have a view on it in terms of that, looking at from a practical point of view of the pricing of land on the island currently. For people looking at individual detached dwellings, I mean, good luck finding a lot under $500,000 on the island. A lot of them are now listed in the 800 range overall. And I guess the cost of this potentially against those types of factors, it's not a huge amount as it relates to the value. I think where this does come into play is in multi-unit development and lower cost housing from that level. And there are options available, I believe, to have different classes of assets in terms of how those DCCs are determined, either based on square footage or, well, square footage would be an example where there may be options to do that. I just also respect the fact that people that are living outside of specific service areas for the sewer area are probably themselves paying between $25,000 and $30,000 for their septic system. And between all the requirements that now exist. So all this kind of offsets, and I'm not sure that there's a lot of, or may not be a lot of interest in terms of subsidy towards that, but I think there needs to be that balance. That's my only real point on that.
Another question. So for instance, a lot that's within the Cove now, and they need to connect. Does the infrastructure, when does the sewage plant need to be upgraded? Like, is it 20 years out?
No, it needs to be upgraded now.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so, but if you're already in the system and you don't need to be subdivided, if you're not looking for a subdivision, then you wouldn't be paying this DCC. The DCC won't apply to you.
Okay.
So why are you suggesting DCC at subdivision rather than building permit?
Well, actually, that decision hasn't been fully made. So.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you for the information, and we'll now move on to the next point.
Sorry, did you, Raj, want anything from the committee as a recommendation, or was this just for information?
This was provided for information.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. The next one is 6.2, the Advisory Committee Terms of Reference. Following the last meeting, we have requested input from committee members relative to the terms of reference, and some of that was provided. And we have a few minutes at least to consider some of that. We'll note that John and Allison and Joyce, in addition to myself, provided information back. One piece of maybe the way to approach this is some of these things are more straightforward than others. So I've kind of kept a note of what's involved here, and maybe I can just start through a list of information, and I may call upon those that submitted information specifically to provide their comments if necessary. One of the first obvious ones was that the terms of, under the terms of reference, in terms of the appointment of committee members, to align that with the new 4-year term of council. That came both from Allison and John. You provided that information as well as a suggestion. John also provided the additional comment that perhaps half of the committee might be appointed every 2 years to sort of keep it rotating, but that's a point for consideration, but I don't know what the practice is currently within the municipality. So the first point is to revise the terms of reference so that the 4-year terms of appointment match those of the current election cycle. Comments or questions, or from those that submitted that information?
Steph doesn't like that idea. She's already told me that.
Okay.
But the reason she doesn't like it is because for all the other committees, we've sort of set them up on a certain term. And I think the idea was to have them all to match. But I think the finance committee may be different. And if you were a new council, then I think the council would want to appoint the people they want on that committee, not something that's carried through just because of the specifics and maybe needing to balance. I don't know. We probably have to think that one through a bit.
Other thoughts, John?
I guess, yeah, it comes down to whether you want continuity from if there's a major change at council. And because actually, rather the terms for the citizens could be 4 years, but they could be appointed 2 years later than the council, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So there is some overlap, because I think you probably all recognize the 4-year term is quite long. Even, you know, I know there are various pros and cons, but anyway, that said, but the citizens perhaps it's not as onerous for them to do 4 years, but to have it staggered might be a benefit. If you got a major turnover in council, it might be a benefit to have some of the citizen reps that have been there for 2 years at least. That's more what I was coming at.
Michael?
Fred, Maureen Nicholson and I at the moment going through, as you know, this review of committees. And part of this review of committees, the terms of reference has certainly been raised. So if you have any thoughts on rotating terms of reference or staggered references, so we don't end up with a totally new, let's talk about the finance committee, a totally new finance committee with nobody, all change. I would be interested if those could be submitted to us, please, because I think it speaks volumes of common sense that suddenly after 4 years, for a new council to find itself possibly with a finance committee or any other committee without any depth of understanding is simply far from ideal. So if that is the feeling here, Maureen and I would like to hear about it, because we would like to incorporate it in the report we're doing on committees. It's a really relevant point. Terms, length of terms, how many terms can a committee member sit on a committee for, and all the rest. Just as how many councillors can be on a committee. The whole thing could be is up for discussion shortly. So your thoughts would be very welcome, because in terms of reference, there is a certain consistency we've built up over the time, but with that certain consistency are certain inconsistencies. So welcome your thoughts, please, if someone could drop us a line on that.
Well, I guess rather than individual comments as it relates to that specifically, is there a position that we as a committee feel is appropriate? That would make a stronger message.
Yeah, but by all means, if you want to take.
So I guess one of the comments coming forward is that is a suggestion from one of the members of the committee that appointments be done on a 4-year basis, first of all, and possibly like every 2 years overall. Is there support for that at the committee level? Allison?
Well, I think I would go for the 4 years for the council members, concurrent with the council election cycle, and John's suggestion, and 4 years for the public members, but maybe a rotating, different 4 years. So you do have continuity if there was a huge change. But it's going to be hard when it's 3 and 3 to do that. I guess you might just have one halfway through the term and then 2 at the beginning of the term, sort of thing. And then people can always stand for a second term.
Other comments?
Joyce.
This is, I
Sure.
guess, the conversation is kind of moot unless we get people that are excited about being on our committees, you know? So I think that probably is more important than anything. But obviously, if we've got a 4-year election cycle, and these were designed to 3 years, at the time when the elections were 3 years, I think we should sort of tidy that up. I do believe that it should be, the community members should not all go off at the same time. And I do believe that there needs to be continuity for the new council. So John's suggestion of the, 2 years, assuming that we can get people that are going to want to be on the committees, great. But I do think a 4-year appointment is appropriate, and then, rotate them from there. 4 years goes by awfully quickly, John.
I find as I mature, that's more so all the time.
And it takes a while to figure out what's going on too. So
It
that's
sure
the
does.
downside with 2 years.
Yeah.
I'm hoping
Sure
to figure it out in a couple of years.
That's true with any committee.
So do we as a committee take a position that we would like our recommendation, which would be part of the work that Michael's working on, that this committee recommends that appointments be for 4 years?
Yeah.
And that consideration be given to trying to, what's the term? Space out or the appointments, stagger appointments to ensure that there are renewed appointments every 2 years for at least half of the committee in some form.
For
Is
the
that good?
public members.
Yeah, there's only 3 public members though, so
Yeah.
it kind of doesn't exactly work.
No.
But
Can I just ask a quick clarification question from staff? Is John's appointment for a full 3 years, or was it to finish somebody else's?
The new terms of reference template that was developed for all of the 26 committees at the municipality 2 years ago was establishing a consistent end date. And that is based on research I did of 12 different municipalities. That end date is November 5th. And that way I'm not doing the steps it takes to get. So there's no 2, 3 years, 4 years. It's whenever you are appointed, it ends 3-ish years to November 5th. So
Okay, so John's not going to end up with an election cycle at this point. We appointed him for 3 years, ending on a November 5th, I guess, 2022 or 2023 or something.
yeah,
Yeah, okay. So we maybe have the rotation established because of that.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Every other municipality, they have a date when their committees start, and then a date when they end. We've just been doing like 3 years from whenever that committee was invented. So
Okay.
it's all over the calendar and not very efficient. So we made an effort to improve the efficiency.
okay. So I think our comment is that this is a recommendation that we're making to the work that's being developed right now. And so I don't think we have to amend our reference, but note that we've made that recommendation. So the outcome of that study will determine what's going to be appropriate and applied generally. We're okay with that?
Thank you, Fred.
Thank you.
Liam's got his hand up.
Sorry?
Liam has his hand up.
Hi, Liam. Sure.
I know I'm non-voting. I'm not even a member. I'm just in attendance. But I just thought perhaps, is there any consideration to expand the membership of community members from 3 to 4, so that there would be the opportunity to have that increased consistency? And I really do like the idea of the rolling staggered to 4 years.
Mhm.
But Joyce's comment is well taken, that we've got to be able to attract and retain that membership.
I don't know if Kristine can weigh in on this one, but we set this up, if you read the report that I distributed, so you could see the background of why, as a quasi, what I would call a standing committee. So 3 members of council and 3 members of the public. And a standing committee, you can never have more members of the public than you have. And the purpose of that was because it's an audit committee function as well. And in most corporations, and you don't necessarily see a lot of audit committees with councils that aren't all made up of council members. So I think to have an audit committee that has most of the members are not members of council is probably not, that's sort of, and I know, and part of the reason we added members of the public was because members of council might not have the expertise needed for any of the functions of the finance committee. And that was how we wanted to get. So that's sort of the logic of why it was 50-50. Christine's nodding, so.
I agree with all that logic. So I think what you're saying is if you increase the public members to 4, then you would probably increase the council members to 4. I think where you're going, Allison, is that if the committee approves the financials, et cetera, are you comfortable with it being non-council members doing that approval and accepting it at the council with less than 50% of council involved?
Okay.
So it's more of a comfort. It's not a yes or no answer. Sorry.
Yeah. We had quite a discussion with Bill Cox, who retired, and Kristine ably took his place. About that, because an audit committee that's not made up entirely of council does not have the authority to accept financials. So that's why we only recommend the acceptance to the council.
Sorry, Allison, and that I'm not sure when that conversation happened, how many years ago. It used to be a sort of practice that a committee would approve the statements, and I would say best practices now is that council ultimately approves, although they delegate the review process.
But I mean, Bill was quite adamant that if the committee was going to approve them, it had to be a committee of all of council members.
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying I'm not sure at that point in time whether council was approving as well or not.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're coming up to a point that I think I have an interest in down further along here in terms of the terms of reference, in terms of the role of this committee generally as it relates to the audit. We've been appointed as an advisory committee, and as such, we have no specific authority whatsoever. We provide recommendations and advice both to management and to council, who are not obligated to follow that advice or really, there's really, other than providing reasonable recommendations, there could be circumstances where it's not addressed. And that's one of the differences in my mind around an audit committee that is within a normal business enterprise, where obviously they do have teeth. If issues are identified in the audit process, the auditors then have an opportunity and a direct line of communication available to the audit committee. And should the audit committee direct and really is ultimately responsible for the appointment of the auditors, that certain actions take place, that's required to happen. This is not something that the advisory committee in its current form has any authority to do. And there is nothing specified as it relates to communication from auditors to the audit committee if in fact there are issues that are identified. It may never happen, but the fact of the matter, it provides a clear framework of authority and responsibility. We're kind of at a point where we're like an audit committee, and we say, well, that sounds pretty good. And we say, well, that the reporting letters, everything is reasonable and blah, blah, blah in our view. But we, again, don't have an authority at the end of the day. We're simply providing, it looks okay, kind of a position overall. So I think that's one of the challenges with the committee and under the terms of reference as to the role of the audit committee as an audit committee, because we're not really an audit committee, not as an advisory committee, we're not. That's where I get kind of, wondering how that could best be defined to clear that matter up. Kristine?
I'm not going to comment on defined, but I will tell you in the practices I see, this is the highest quality I see in all municipalities in terms
Oh,
of
thank
paying attention and reading it and knowing what you're talking about. And so I think the purpose that you were trying to achieve is being achieved. I would say that for sure. Bringing
So
the right skills to the table.
but our role as it relates to the terms of reference, I guess my comment is that in providing oversight, we're providing oversight over all, and it's really limited to, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. In providing, saying that in our view, things look fine, right? We're not dictating activity. We can provide our recommendations, but I think as part of that overview is that it's limited to the committee providing its recommendations, and that's really the extent of it. I wouldn't want other people saying, okay, well, you're the audit committee, why didn't you do this down the road?
You have limited power, yes.
Totally.
But Fred, if there was something we really wanted to see done, then we are a committee that could make a recommendation to council that this happen. And there's 3 members of council on the committee that would be tasked with taking that recommendation to council.
And that could be the case, but it also could be the case where those 3 members on the committee themselves may not all be in agreement of what actions coming forward. So I look at it as a position of the committee versus there's some independence that's normally associated with that role. So it's a bit complicated, but
No, with respect, Fred, and I understand exactly where you're coming from, because that line that normally delineate the audit committee from the finance committee, and I hope for goodness sake we don't end up with another committee or subcommittee. You know, I wonder whether it's something we could take off table to have a look at, because your point is a fine one. And I understand exactly where you're coming from. And the reason it hasn't caused concern is that in all practicality, it seems to have worked well. And if we as a finance committee had a concern or raised a point, then strictly speaking, your council members are obliged to take that forward as if that was a committee recommendation, whatever our opinions might be. And it seems to have in practice worked quite well. It still doesn't answer exactly the point that you've raised, however. And I'm wondering whether we, if necessary, we could debate it for a long time, but
hey, I think we should throw it in your study again, Michael.
Yeah.
Just push that onto your study.
Please not. But because if I derive some comfort, it seems that in terms of actual practice, it seems to have worked pretty well. I have never felt a concern, and I'm looking at people on this screen that I know, that if they had serious objections, serious concerns, and serious issues that bothered them from an audit standpoint, that they could ever not be fully and extensively brought forward. So I'm not sure, Fred, it doesn't exactly answer the question that you've raised, and that is the issue I'm struggling with, as I think you are. But in all practical terms, I can't say it doesn't keep me awake at night. I've got other issues which probably.
Yeah, I think my comment is that in terms of wording, I think we just want to be clearer about the role, because as stated, I don't think it really states what the role is. I mean, it's kind of there's an assumption that there may be an assumption of certain things happening that may not be happening. And I think while we're all kind of, everything's cool the way it is right now, if there were issues that came forward that were challenging to the auditor, and for Kristine's sake, I guess my comment, Kristine, is if you had an issue with that could crop up that was not resolvable, who would you go to?
I would definitely go to the audit committee first, for sure. But and I guess it depends on the issue.
I'm trying to say, okay, if things happen, and that's part of it. I look at risk management frameworks and stuff. I look at stuff like that. And it just seems to me that you'd want to say, okay, if something happens, this is the course of action that would take place, or this is the communication that was,
And I guess we typically say we report to the audit committee, and I agree that this is a different audit committee, but ultimately that report gets approved by council. So I would feel that I could go directly to council if I had to, if I thought it was serious enough. I guess it depends on if it's a management issue or an audit committee issue or a council issue.
sure. Liam?
Yeah, I would like to be able to explore this further because I'm not clear on and Allison, you probably know this better than I do, but I'm not clear on the delegation authorities in terms of whether this committee could be delegated the full authority that an audit committee
No,
would have. So then in my read of the community charter, that in order for it to have the full authority that we're talking about, it would have to be a committee of council.
entirely,
like
yeah,
entirely of council members.
Yeah.
And so Fred, your point I think is really excellent, and that it's better to be more specific and more clear about the role and the function. And we could build in some of that, even that risk management framework. And I'm wanting to do that in other areas of administration. But I think to get to the sort of true audit committee role and function, we'd have to change the entire structure and membership.
Okay. Well, we'll bring that back as a matter of, I guess, to be addressed going forward. We're not going to resolve that today. Any
no.
other comments or questions on that point?
Well, I'm wondering with the whole thing with the terms of reference, what time is it?
Well, it's 5:30, right?
Yeah, exactly. Should
So
we have further discussion later on this or another meeting? What we
I'm
can have just,
fine with that. We're not going to resolve any of these issues at today's meeting, really.
yeah,
I mean, I think the discussion is important. And I think we haven't got into very far into some of the things that Joyce brought forward.
yeah.
And I think she brought forward some points that are really good for discussion purposes. And
So maybe
be
we could
addressed.
defer and have a special meeting where we just talk about the terms of reference.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Other members?
Yep.
I don't think we're gonna, it needs to be like super quick. I think
Well,
we might want to wait for a little while because there's some subjects here that have come forward that are not going to be resolved quickly
yeah.
and require quite a bit of discussion even before we speak about it.
If I could just add that I really regard our role not only being a support for council, but a support for our senior management. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a symbiotic relationship, and I would very much like to have some input from both Raj and from Liam on this. And, you know, if you had a wish list as to what you would like this committee to do, I'd like to know what that wish list is. And I can tell you to put it in the garbage, or I can say, wow, that's pretty, you know, that's pretty important. And it's too bad that we missed it. So I'd like some input from staff.
Okay. Can I make a suggestion that I'm not going to suggest that we move it to the next meeting. I'm going to suggest that it be, if there is a separate section, that we make that decision at the next meeting that we have, because we're also looking to address reserves, and we're also looking to address the guiding principles around budget. That this stuff actually all leads into itself. The information that Allison provided in that terms of the report, it's got a lot of material in there.
Yeah.
That's still quite relevant, needless to say, in terms of challenges, both for the role of what this committee should be considered that it's responsible for, the role of the council generally as it relates to things such as budgeting cycles and other areas. And I think that it will be good discussion that would come out of the subjects from the next meeting that will add to the conversation around this as well. So again, I don't think it's like a critical thing. We've got to redo it now. So let's intend to at least note it at the next meeting and then bring it forward for a subsequent discussion to that point. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Let's move on from that point, please. Okay. Thank you. Anyway, I was really happy, Allison, in terms of that report. I thought that was quite fascinating. in terms of level of discussion.
I thought I sent it to you all before, but I guess not.
I think I had seen it, but anyway, I think that, no, actually, I haven't seen it, actually. I don't think that one. Anyway,
I haven't seen it, and I'm the oldest member on the committee other than
Okay.
Allison.
so
And,
Joyce,
actually, I think it should be part of our orientation package. I really do.
yeah, anyway, it's a very good document. Anyway, moving on. 6.3 year-end financial results. And this is going to Raj and to Aoife, and report dated April 30th, and also operating results and capital results. And some of the stuff has some relevance, but probably I think, Raj, we can move through it fairly quickly since we're dealing with the financial statements.
I agree. So what you have in my report is it's a general fund part A and B is a general fund operating report that shows revenue and funding sources for 2020. And make a long story short, essentially our revenues exceed our expenditures by $97,000. The financial summary of operating revenues and expenditures includes transfers from and to reserves, which are typically excluded in the PSAB statements. And so it shows that the general operating, and it also shows the annual operating results and variances from budget. There was a report that explained all of the significant variances from budget. So I won't go over them in the report. I hope you've all, I won't go over them now, but I hope you've all had a chance to go through the report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions on the variance explanations.
Any questions?
You knew I'd have questions, right? So planning and development, there's a note that legal expenditures due to subdivision sales were also charged to planning and development. Does this people we don't charge everything out to the applicant when they're doing a subdivision or a rezoning?
I'd have to I believe not, but I'd have to double check with Daniel on that.
From my recollection, Councillor Morris, that is a practice for large projects, but for smaller ones, it has not been practiced.
So and if I can add to that, for those that we did charge, we would still have the variance in expenditures, but we would have a favorable variance to offset that in revenues.
So is there some revenue from some of these people showing somewhere? Because that's where it's hard to tell from the lack of analysis of what makes up user fees and other revenue. So I guess I'm just wondering if, what was the total legal budget last year? It never shows up as a separate line item. And is it something we should be looking into trying to recover more of, I guess, is my question.
Yeah, I'm going to note that, and I will look into that. And as we develop our fees and charges bylaw, we'd definitely be reviewing that as well.
Okay, and then the comment under financial services about the real estate commission was expensed as an expense item?
Actually, we do have revenue. It would offset against the revenue that we received from the sale. However, the real estate commission was an expenditure, and I believe it got coded. It got coded to the financial services area, and so eventually, it offsets against the revenue. At the end of the day, the result is the same. However, it is showing up as an expense in financial services expenditures.
So the gain on sale of the property, how does it reflect it on that? Then you're just showing the net proceeds as the amount for the gain on sale?
So the gain on sale would actually be reported separately. Yeah, well, revenue and the expenditures, and the bottom line that falls out would be the gain on sale.
But I'm just thinking like the credit sales proceeds 875, debit sales commission 45, debit cost of land 20. the net number is the gain on sale. So is that
Yes.
how it was done?
That's
You
how it
didn't
would.
just, you didn't just do 875 against 20.
I'd have to take a look at exact transaction. Aoife, have you got the transaction there?
Yep, 1 sec.
So I get, and that's the other question when we get into the reserve, there's only 845 that's gone into the reserve. So I'm assuming the difference was the commission between 875 and 845 or whatever. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Maybe you can provide that information back to Alice, please.
Yeah, I can provide that information to you offline, Allison.
Okay, and then I guess, well, everybody might want the answer. Transfers out, the 1.23 million that we got from the province, I'm assuming, are we going to set up an actual reserve fund for that? You said
We
to the
have-
COVID restart reserve, is it one of those reserves of surplus or is it going to be a statutory reserve?
It is a reserve of surplus. And we've set up that reserve.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Thank you. Carry on, Raj.
Okay, next report here is the capital results report. So for the general fund. So the 2020 general fund capital budget for 2020 was 6,333,100. Spending to the end of December 31st was close to 1.3 million. So most of the variance from budget was due to delayed starts for significant projects such as the fire hall, community center, and the multi-use path. Other variances were due to the timing of when specific works can be done. So for example, work on the Miller Road culvert could not be completed or could only be completed during the fishing windows, which falls within a 2-week period in August. So that work that was budgeted in 2020, a significant portion of that will need to be done in 2020 in the 2021 fishery windows. So overall, capital works and expenditures for projects did track close to budget for those projects that were completed and were in progress.
Any questions for Raj on that point?
Is the 632, 634 the multi-use path, or does that include the culverts and?
Sorry, the 632 and 634, what are you?
Well, 632, 364, sorry.
Yeah, the 364 and the sections.
Well, under transportation, you said we spent 632 and change.
Yeah, that would include culverts.
So that includes the culverts and the path? Or is that?
Yeah, that would include the multi-use path in there as well.
Okay.
Yep. Anything else? Hearing
Or is-
none. Sorry?
Well, you've got grounds and trails too, so that doesn't include the multi-use path.
Now, the grounds and trails happens to be the turf field.
Oh, okay.
And then a couple of other smaller projects incorporated in there, but the big piece in grounds and trails is the artificial turf field.
Okay.
Okay. So no other further comments. 6.4 is we move to a closed meeting. A recommendation, as noted in the agenda, that the Financial Advisory Committee move to a closed meeting pursuant to section 91L of the Community Charter. 90.1, a part of the council meeting may be closed to the public if the subject matter is being considered relates to more than one following. K, negotiations and related discussions respecting the proposed provision of a municipal service that are at the preliminary stages and that in the view of council could reasonably be expected to harm the interest of the municipality if they're made public. So if I could, our recommendation, if I could have a mover, please. Joyce, seconder? Don't see any hands. Thank you, Allison. Okay, well now